Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and a special and rather unique show. The military history world lost one of its titans on October the 26th. Dr. Tim Cook, author, educator, public speaker, and leading light at the Canadian War Museum, passed away. Over the next 90 minutes or so, colleagues, friends, fellow historians, and fans will join me to pay tribute to his legacy and hopefully share some of their stories of meeting him, working with him, how he's inspired them, etc. So I'm going to start with a first-time guest of World War II TV. There'll be plenty of others who've been on before, but Alex is a Brit who lives in Canada. You may have read his article. I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Alex. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Woody.
I really appreciate you being here. Now, the reason I want you to be on first is that you published this wonderful article in Legion magazine over in Canada about how you had interviewed Tim Cook previously to discuss Dieppe for a magazine. And I just felt it summed up, and I'll let you explain more, how at his point in his career, he was still just jumping to meet new people and express his interest in World War II. So tell us a little bit about the article and how you come to interview him via a system like this, via video.
I mean, the reality of the situation is just I would not be where I am now as a staff writer for Legion magazine over here in Canada without him. It's kind of as simple as that. I mean, he wasn't the reason why I got into the historical writing industry per se. That I credit to Andy Saunders of Britain at War magazine, or former editor of Britain at War magazine. But he's kind of the reason why my love for history and my love for Canada kind of collided. It happened in Mevergizy in Cornwall, of all places. I'd asked my father-in-law to buy a copy of his book, The Necessary War, which I am going to pick up and bring out here. And he probably had no idea why I wanted such a seemingly obscure book about Canadian history. And yeah, I just picked it up. I started reading it, and I fell in love with his writing style, the way he sort of framed the story. And it went from there. And I realized from that moment onwards that I wanted to have a little bit of what Tim Cook had, to highlight Canada's extraordinary contribution during the Second World War. And yeah, it was beggars belief almost when I had the opportunity for History of War magazine at the time to interview Tim Cook, as you say, about the Dieppe raid. And I think the thing that really struck me about that first time that I spoke with him was he was so good at telling the blow by blow of Operation Jubilee, as is obviously very important, the big picture. But it was really his way of highlighting that human cost. Those people, the Canadians, 916 Canadians who lost their lives on Dieppe beaches. I felt like that's when the story really came to life. And I feel like if you read any of his books, you get that sense too, that sense of balancing the big picture with the small, that I just think is just almost unparalleled with any other author or historian I've read about Canadian history. That's for sure.
I mean, it's fitting that we're going to have Mike Nyberg join us in about half an hour's time, because Mike is one of the people, along with Tim, who was able to juggle very complicated themes, the military themes, the social aspect of things, the remembrance, the historiography, and yet make it all understandable and highly readable and made you want to learn more. There are some people who, when they write about history, it becomes a struggle to read it. You're trying to take on board lots of complicated themes and you want to learn, and the history is fantastic, but it feels a struggle. Despite how many complicated themes he brought up, I never felt I was anything other than enjoying, quote unquote, his books. Even when it was harsh subjects, you enjoyed the wordplay that he just wrote beautifully. And so, when you're there speaking face to face with him the first time, as I said, I'm calling him a titan of history. Were you nervous? Was it?
I was extraordinarily. I was posting all over social media with like silly faces, like I'm back I'm about to interview my icon. I'm about to interview my icon. Wish me luck. Wish me luck. I was so nervous. But the moment I went on, the moment I started speaking with him, he just gives you the time of day like anyone, like no one I've ever met really. Like he was just so, he was so informal at the beginning. Like he was just, how are you, Alex? What have you been up to? What are you doing? I've been watching your work and stuff like that. And he just, the way I write it in the article that you referenced earlier is he made me feel like Walter Cronkite, frankly. Like he just made me feel like I was so much further along in my career than I was at the time. And he just treated me like he would any other journalist. It wasn't just I'm doing this kid a favor, just for a small little piece. Like he was genuinely happy to be there. He was genuinely happy to see this young starstruck Brit highlighting Canada's stories and help, obviously through his extraordinary assistance with that particular article. But he was just a wonderful person beyond being a historian. He was just so kind and compassionate. I think he knew that I was nervous. I think he knew how much his work had meant to me. But he just made me feel so at ease. And I've been very blessed to interview a lot of people since those. I mean, that felt like a very much the beginning of my career. And, now I write for Leisure Magazine. I am interviewing, dozens of people over the, I've interviewed hundreds of people at this point. So I feel like I've sort of honed my skills, but you've got to start somewhere. And I started with Tim Cook.
Towards the end of this show, probably be the last thing I do. I'm going to play a video David Patterson, the general, recorded because he couldn't be with us today. And David, he wouldn't mind me saying, is the senior member of the World War II TV community, and he knew Tim when Tim was, in his 20s. And I think from what he was saying in the video and from what I understand from David, I think Tim Cook recognized that as a lot of the famous people and powerful people, important people do, is being nice to people on the way up and then being nice to people on the way down, and everybody's at somewhere on the ladder. And David obviously was able to influence Tim at the beginning of Tim's career, and then what a career it was, and we'll talk about that. And then I think Tim obviously saw that. Well, they pass it forwards, they say. So, well, we've got two other guests in the waiting room who we might as well bring in, both of whom knew him better than you did and I did. He was on World War II TV 3 times. I met him once at the Society of Military History Conference in San Diego. So I'll bring in Carla Jane Stokes and Mike Bechtold now, and they should appear there. I've got a new layout of screens for folks, so I'm having to play around with things. So and then David O'Keefe is in the wings. I'll bring him in a minute. So Mike, you were there waiting first. You're similar age group to Tim. How did you first meet him? What's your first reaction? What was to being on this show today?
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to start by thanking you, Woody, for putting together this show. I think it's really important for all of us to talk about this. I knew Tim for a long time. I knew him for 25 years plus, something like that. And it's been tough. I know Tim had a lot of health problems, but it seemed to me that he'd come through it, and it looked like he sort of beat all those fucking cancer demons. I'm sorry for swearing. But in the end, it still got him, and I think we were all in shock when that happened. So I think it's important for us to talk like this, to sort of remember him and honor him and make sure that he's not forgotten. But no, I knew Tim for a long time. I think the first time I met him was when he came to Laurier to give a talk when he was either doing his MA or had just recently finished his MA. And well, I mean, I think everybody knows this book. This was his first book, No Place to Run, about gas warfare, which was his MA thesis, which is absolutely remarkable. I mean, he was marked early on as a mover and shaker that he was able to publish at that sort of young age. But Tim came and gave a paper at Laurier, and I don't know how many of you have seen him speak in the last few years recently. Tim's was, I'm going to trip up on that a whole bunch of times because he's not a was to me. Was an amazing speaker. He was engaging. He was informative. It was just a general pleasure to watch him talk. But that first talk he gave at Laurier, he was terrible. And it's like he was a grad student learning his way, and he was talking about demon rum, which was one of his big topics early on in the First World War, and he struggled. He was not engaging. He presented an outstanding paper. I mean, it was later published, but his public persona hadn't evolved yet, and it was not too many years until I saw him speak at Guelph, and I forget what book he was touring at the time, but he was singing. He was like engaging, singing in a way that you never see historians doing. So yeah, that growth was amazing to see from him. But Tim, and I think I used this in the past, Tim was a great historian, but he was an even better friend. He was the kind of person that lifted up everyone around him. He was always there when you needed help. Like Alex was saying, he made time for everybody. And it didn't matter if you were a senior PhD or a colleague or somebody who had just like popped into the War Museum off the street. He gave you the time that you needed to get whatever you were looking for him. And he was just so unselfish in presenting everything in terms of sharing his knowledge and helping people along. And that's certainly the case with my friendship with him. I can't even begin to tell you how helpful he was, how supportive he was. He was always the first person to send an email saying, "Congratulations, Mike, on this," or "It's about time they gave you notification for this," or whatever. Tim did his PhD at the University of New South Wales with Jeff Gray, and he was really great about sharing his time and his thoughts about that, to the point where I ended up doing my PhD with Jeff Gray in Australia as well. And I'm not sure I would have gotten to that point without Tim's help and support and sort of blazing the way. And so I'll be ever thankful for that. But I mean, throughout everything that Tim did, he just gave of himself. And I was looking back through my inbox, and the last email I had with him was at the beginning of October. And I just sent an email to him asking a question about some random thing, and he got right back to me. And going back, I can see now that things weren't going well for him at that time. It would have been known to him. He hadn't shared publicly or with me what was going on, but sort of the trajectory would have been clear to him at that point. Yet he was still taking the time to respond and to answer. And I think it really, maybe in no better way, shows what kind of a person he was.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. We've got another guest, but I'm going to bring in David O'Keefe first, then Carla Jean, and then Jim, who's joining us from the UK. And such as a testament to his legacy is that people have been kind of queuing up to join the show, and those who can't join the show have sent me messages saying they're going to watch it and appreciate it. So, David, you know, we've met, we've been for beers, we've been on battlefields together, we've talked about stuff, and you know, you like me, I think, David, can be a little bit cynical about the world sometimes and grumpy. Is it fair to say that Tim never lost his enthusiasm for just the study of history, even though he was sharing his knowledge with others? It seemed to me he was still on the same quest to learn more at 54 as he had been when he was 18. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I met Tim back in, must have been 94 when he was an archivist. A lot of people tend to forget he followed, I think, in his dad's footsteps, and he was at Library and Archives Canada at the time. And, you know, he was kind of that wide-eyed kid, you know, like we all were at one point. But he really was. And he was like, well, I think I'm going to go into history. I think I'm going to do this. I mean, I like archives, but you know, and he was just, you know, everything that Mike said, it was apparent at that time. And then, of course, you know, he quickly became known as the gas guy because of his work on that. And but then it was just his career and his development just became stellar. And, you know, as Mike mentioned, he was one of the first ones of our sort of generation to publish. And, you know, he probably was 2 steps behind the rest of us, and he just came flying past us. And that was the amazing part of him. But yeah, I mean, you're talking on that. He had a youthful exuberance for everything historical and everything Canada. And I think one of the big things that, you know, for those of you who may not know a lot about Canada and Canadiana, we lost another giant just a couple of weeks before in Ken Dryden. And, you know, these were people, the Hall of Fame hockey player who went on to Parliament, wrote incredible books about Canadiana and everything else. And losing Tim at the same time, I mean, that is a huge loss for us at probably one of the worst times we've had in a long time. So that's been the tough part. But yeah, no, Tim, I was always blown away by his ability to pump out material and pump out material of quality. I mean, he was doing this on a regular basis. And, you know, and on sort of on a personal note, when, you know, Mike mentioned this, it was years ago. One of my books was up for an award, and Tim had won the award the year before that. And he was kind enough to call me. And, you know, it was just before Christmas, probably 2013. And I guess he had just started fighting against the cancer. And, you know, typical thing. I hadn't seen him in a little while, but, you know, it was always, whenever you pick up the phone or you talk to Tim, it's like you haven't, you know, like you saw him yesterday. And so I said, so, hey, what's up? And he goes, well, I got cancer. And I said, oh, geez. I said, how bad? And he goes, well, he said, I'm dying. And like out of the blue. And, but that was Tim. Tim wasn't going to hold anything back. Tim wasn't going to hide anything. Tim was going to talk to you. And he said it because I think he understood that, you know, what he was trying to do and what he was doing, it could all be gone. And I think that was it. It was not about, oh, woe is me or anything like that. It was really important. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I've got this rare form. And he said, they've just given me a couple of weeks. And I said, well, what's going on? What are you doing? He said, well, they got me on an experimental drug. And he said, but this is it. He said, if this doesn't work, you know, I'm done for. Well, I mean, you know, I know we are sitting here today, but, you know, I'm not sure whether it was the drug or whatever else, or just his sheer will to fight. But, you know, he did get another 11 years, you know, 11 or 12 years, which was remarkable. But I think that gives you a bit of a testament to the man. I mean, and also too, I think one thing you have to remember is just how productive he was. And I don't say that in a sort of pejorative sense. I mean, he truly was productive with great pieces of Canadian history while battling this.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, raising a family, battling this, doing this. This is really extremely heroic stuff, courageous stuff, in my opinion. And I think at the end of the day, you know, he's worthy of the respect that any of the men he ever wrote about in the front lines, you know, I mean, he really was. I mean, a lot of people don't realize what he's been going through for, you know, almost a decade and a half. So it's, you know, it's quite something to see her and talk about the gas man all these years later.
Yeah, well, I'm intrigued to bring Jim in later on and talk about the gas, because living in our, or spending a lot of time in Arras, I'm sure, I'm guessing it was probably Tim's work on gas that maybe drew Jim in first. But Carla Jean has been sitting there for a while as well. I messaged Lucy Betteridge Dyson yesterday about whether she wanted to do, but she said, I didn't really know Tim very well, but she suggested Carla Jean. So, like Alex, I guess Carla Jean, he was someone who, when you first met him, were you a bit intimidated?
I mean, I guess like Alex, it was like Alex and I think, are a similar age, and so from a similar generation. I remember buying At the Sharp End and Shock Troops from a bookstore and like carrying it home, which weighed about 37 pounds. And so I met him about a decade after that. And it was intimidating because I think people like us tend to see historians as rock stars because we're giant nerds. And we met at a conference. Remember we ate breakfast together, and he's like, so Carla, what are you working on? And I like dropped my silverware because Tim Cook's asking me what I'm working on. Yeah. And we were lucky. I was lucky enough to kind of make contact with him over the years, and he put me up for an article once, which was so kind and generous. And so, I mean, I'm just, again, one of those kids in Canadian history that was just lucky enough to have met this very kind man, um, who, I mean, if he's the gas guy, then I'm the photo girl. He's like, hey,
Yeah.
this article you can write about photos, it pays. Why don't you try it? And I was like, cool, I'll do that. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's funny that Mike brings up that apparently Tim's one of his first presentations was not good, because I remember Mike and I did a podcast with Tim, gosh, maybe 4 years ago or something like that. And I remember texting Mike being like, Tim just put on his Tim voice, because he would really like, he would come, so you would be talking and it's just like talking to someone, but then the camera starts and like Tim comes alive and it's the Tim voice, and it was so wonderful. I will ramble forever, so we can keep moving along.
Well, I just want to ask you, I mean, the annoying thing about Tim, and I mean this very respectfully, is he was a master of so many different things. I mean, his contribution to First World War literature, that alone would make him live forever. Add the World War II literature, you know, another thing. Add the museum, the work with the museum, another thing. Add everything, the sharing of it via podcasts and videos and conferences, another. I mean, and he excelled at all of them. I mean, as Mike said, it may be like a real human being. He didn't excel immediately, but he rapidly became good at what he did. And I think it's important that we're all acknowledging that he was a master of so many fields. But Jim's been sitting there in the sidebar in the rating well there for a little bit, and I've never met. Like Alex, I've not met Jim first. Jim came on a recommendation from Alex Churchill. Jim is a trustee at the Great War Group. So Jim, I mean, you said yes when you went to come on and talk about him. So introduce yourself and what was your connection with Tim Cook?
Basically, VB Ridge. And that goes back to me being in Arras, which I've been 40 odd years on battlefields, either Normandy, Western Front, everywhere in Europe, really. And I was working in Germany and retired from there and had a house in Arras. So I retired to there. And because of being in Arras, it was like, what's the battle that happened here? And there was so little literature on it at the time. This is the period around 2012, 13 onwards. I retired in 14. And then properly started on what I thought was a book. I'm a maths teacher originally, so in a sense, I was very much an amateur historian writing a book, which was to some extent quite. I amazed myself on that point of view. But then when it got around the sort of late 2015, I was in Arras and I was working on there, and for one reason or another, I found out that Tim was actually writing a book on Vimy. Now there's very little on Arras, but there are lots of books on Vimy, including some particularly awful ones, which I almost discarded as soon as I started reading them, because all my research that I've been doing for years had just shown that most of what was written was rubbish. And I just thought, this is interesting that someone's writing this. And I looked at his sort of, I didn't really know him then as a historian and so on. I'd seen the books, and I was collecting those books for the preparation for the book on Arras. But I didn't really I hadn't known him, or I hadn't really seen him very much in literature wise, on presentations or anything like that. But like a lot of historians, what I would call true military historians at the time, trained and experienced military historians, he was standing up there somewhere on a pedestal. But I thought, I'll try and make touch, because if he's writing a book as well, then maybe there's some common ground, maybe there's some contact, I don't know. My naivety of thinking that he might actually be interested. And I sort of got through the publishers, I got sort of various touch, and I thought, I'm not going to hear anything. I hadn't heard anything from a number of other academics that I tried to make contact with, UK ones. And then all of a sudden, he was emailing me and basically saying, oh, Jim, you're doing a book on Arras, so you're doing Vimy as well. Is Vimy part of it? Long story short there, we had all the way through the latter part of 15 and almost all the way through 16, a long email conversation. And I remember at the time wondering why we couldn't have that, why he wasn't coming up. If he's writing a book on Vimy, why he wasn't here? Not here as in the UK now, but I was there in Arras. Why he wasn't here writing it? Why he wasn't here walking the ground and so on? And I must have been in the back of my mind, I was sort of semi-critical, thinking, if you're writing a book on Vimy, you should be here. And not realizing that he'd done that a long time before and so on, and not realizing at all because unlike for Dave, he obviously didn't know me well enough to say, oh, by the way, I'm not coming over because I have cancer. I had no idea of his illness. So we had this long correspondence, and I was just literally, using the lovely UK phrase, gobsmacked, because here's someone who I was a nobody in all senses of history, writing, and so on. I now have some literature to my name. I have a couple of books out. I in the Great War Group. I write articles for our magazine. People know me a little bit more now, and people know me in the guiding world as well. But for someone of his stature to pay any attention to me in the first place, even though we were working on something similar, he could have just said, well, he's just an amateur, he's just not doing anything really important, he's not important to me. But we had a long conversation over it. And I remember the first time I knew he was ill was when I bought his book. I'd already finished, it might have been published, his was published, and I read the book. And of course, his acknowledgements are at the end, not at the beginning. So I'd read the whole book, and I remember moaning about it in a number of places, thinking, no, that's not right. No, that's not right. I'm thinking, we're going to have an interesting conversation afterwards. But then I got to the end of the acknowledgements where he actually talks about being at the oncologist and being ill and hoping that how his family and his support for his illness through. And I just got to the end of that, and I literally, and I'll admit this to the world of listeners here, I wept. I literally was weeping. I was on my own, luckily. No one was watching me break down. But I couldn't believe it was the hindsight of this, something like around 14, 15 months of correspondence with someone who I admired tremendously for having anything to do with me. And then finding out that through all of that period, he was actually battling cancer. And it, in some respects, it meant that we lost touch then, and a little bit through my fault. I think I felt very awkward in terms of coming back to him over his book and almost continuing the conversation we've been having. And we sort of lost touch, which I look back now, in a sense, guiltily, but I don't think it will have meant that much to Tim. I mean, I don't think I meant a great deal to him. I don't think it was that sort of situation. But to me, that was a measure of the man. If you're all talking about him and his kindness and so on, to take time out to have some input and discussion with someone who was basically a nobody in the academic and military history world over a similar subject that he was being involved in at the time and writing about at the time, both of us moaning about the publishers, moaning about the editors, moaning about whatever's going on at the time, was just remarkable. And it just showed, and it has sent me in a situation now, a direction now where in the Great War Group, we are encouraging people to write, encouraging people who were like me, had a totally different background, loved middle history, but never wrote anything. I never thought they could write anything, to have a go. And I now encourage them. I have what you could call a Tim Cook model, where I will never do anything but support and guide. And I will always listen to somebody who wants to do something like that. And for me, that is, if anybody asks me, it's a Tim Cook model of support for people who are interested in the area of history that we are in. So well,
thank you very much, Jim. I mean, I may have to drop you out because Mike Nyberg is joining us and Alex Barnard-Black is joining us. I'll bring Mike in a few minutes' time, but it's testament to what he meant to people that everyone's sharing this. I know Mike Bechtold has a couple of things there. Then I'll bring Mike and Norma's in there. Everyone's lining up to speak about it, but I'll bring Mike Bechtold in first because you knew him probably the longest of us here. So share a couple of things with us, please.
Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight what Jim was just saying about what Tim was going through in the background that nobody knew about. And I mean, his body of scholarship is absolutely remarkable for someone who was 56 years old. He published 19 or 20 books and dozens of articles and all the contributions at the War Museum and everywhere else he was doing stuff. And that, like I said, that's just remarkable in and of itself. But he was battling cancer for a big part of that. He had a family, 3 young daughters at home that were never second best. They all got all the time they needed. Yet Tim still found time to be productive in writing and productive at work and spending time with the family. And I think that I don't know. I don't know if he'd never slept or if he had some sort of widget that he could go back in time and make time, but it's just a superhuman production. And I guess the other thing, if we need some things to look forward to, is that we haven't heard the last from Tim yet. It's come out that he's got one more book that's due to be released next year. The Unquiet Western Front is the title. I'm not sure the topic, but I think it has to do with the veterans experience, and I know everybody's going to be looking forward to that a lot. And there's at least one more article out there. He gave a paper at a conference at RMC 3 years ago on the Canadian experience in the Battle of the Scheldt. And that chapter is going to be coming out in an edited collection maybe this year, but probably, no, actually not this year, next year, I believe. So there's still more Tim Cook to read that you haven't seen, which is pretty exciting.
This will have David O'Keefe. Thank you, Mike. David O'Keefe's final word, because David O'Keefe has to run, and I'll bring Mike Nyberg and Alex in. So, David, final word before you head off.
Yeah, I just think, we're all gathering here today for a particular reason, and it's obvious, like what I mentioned earlier about about losing a massive voice, and not just in Canadian military history right across the board. And I think the final word was, and I'm pretty sure Tim would appreciate this, that he's passing the torch to all of us to continue, and we really have to step up. There won't be, hopefully there'll be another Tim coming around, but I don't see it soon. So it's all up to us to shoulder it and continue to keep the bar high like he did. Okay.
Thank you, David. I'll drop you out because there's people lining up. I know Mike Nyberg is interrupting a family thing. I'll bring him in. So cheers, David. I'll see you again. Thanks, time. Let's bring Mike Nyberg in. Hi, Mike. First American. Well, no. An American joining us, which is great. Another one joining us. So, Mike, I name checked you a couple of minutes ago, Mike, because I feel that you and Tim, in some ways, you overlapped because you did sort of the military history, geopolitical history, and I remember your touching Facebook post when you heard about Tim's passing. So, share with us a couple of your memories of working with Tim.
Yeah, Paul, first off, I just want to say thank you for doing this. It's a really touching thing to get Tim's friends together and give us this opportunity. And I want to thank Mike Bechtold, who I see in the corner of my screen too, Mike, I think not only were you the one who first introduced me to Tim, you were the one who broke the news to me. And I have two memories of Tim that I think I want to share. And I think they both are going to touch on things that I heard Mike briefly say. And the first is that Tim and I checked in on each other quite a bit during the COVID shutdown to talk about what we were working on, to talk about the projects we were doing, and of course, to talk about our families, which, as Mike said, was always central to Tim and always the very first thing for him. And I remember Tim and I were at the same conference in Canberra, Australia, which is a long way from Ottawa. And Tim was 4 flights or some crazy thing that he did to get from Ottawa to Canberra. And I was really looking forward to spending time with him at this conference. And Tim came for 2 days and then turned around and went back to Ottawa. And I remember saying something like, that's got to be the most insane thing I've ever heard. And Tim said, well, I had to balance my desire to be here and be a part of this and my desire to be back home with my family. And I thought that just touched everything about Tim. And, I know what David said about us carrying on the legacy of somebody as powerful as Tim. And of course, it's going to take all of us, of course, to do that. And I mean that both as a scholar, and I mean that as one of the kindest, gentlest, kindest, sweetest people that I think you're ever going to meet in this profession or in any other. So I just want to, again, say thanks to everybody here for putting this together and for having this moment so that we can all have this emotional moment with our memories of Tim, both as a scholar and as just the absolute prince of a human being that Tim was.
Thank you, Mike. And Alex, you said you wanted to say a couple of things about what he's working on, what he's going to be still bringing us more history.
That's right. I mean, I can make this my final word because I'm conscious that you've got other people that you want to bring in. But the one thing that I wanted to highlight was the fact for Legion magazine, Tim was working right until the end. He, the weekend that he passed away, he had a deadline due on the Monday. And he knew this, and he must have known that he was on his way out at this point because he'd made arrangements for one of our colleagues to complete his piece. but I just think that speaks to his dedication, his commitment, his passion. That I just think is just so unparalleled. And yeah, I just found that so extraordinary when I heard that. And I think I found it so difficult because one of the things, one of my responsibilities at the magazine is I have to proofread all of the pieces. And just going through that last piece and proofreading it, obviously I wasn't making too many notes. It's Tim Cook, for goodness sake. But nonetheless, it was just such a surreal experience for me. And we've put a note at the end of this piece to say as much that it was Tim Cook's last piece with us. And it really was a matter of days before that it was due, or it was due a matter of days after he passed away. But yeah, I just think it's just that speaks to his commitment, his dedication. I will always be great. I'm flowing with gratitude for that man.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring Mike Nyberg back in again. Alex, you're going to run now, but I've just brought another Alex. Number 2 is we've got Alex Fitzgerald Black off the bench now. But Mike, before you joined us, we were talking very much about Tim's legacy as a Canadian historian. But of course, one of his last books was The Good Allies, was about his work between the US and Canada in World War II. And as our American here there, it would be wrong of us to say his influence was only within Canada, because his influence, I mean, I'm a Brit. Jim's spends half his time in France. So from an American point of view, what was Tim saying about the North American experience that was important?
Yeah, Tim and I had a lot of conversations about this, about some of the things that Americans think are exceptional to their experience, and Canadians think are exceptional to their experience, that are in fact not all that exceptional. So we had a lot of conversations about that. And, another one of his legacies is going to be his book, that book that you mentioned, Woody, is was one of the 3 finalists for the Gilder Lehrman Book Prize in New York City, that I'm going to that ceremony next week. And, when that book came out, I told everybody on the committee, I told my fellow jurors, not only did I read the book in manuscript form, not only did I talk to Tim about it as he was putting it together, but I felt I was too close to that book to be one of the judges. So I've recused myself. The book is technically a prize in American history, but the quality of the book and the way that Tim was talking about the connections between the 2 countries made it a very easy finalist. So I'm going to go to New York. The prize, it got to the finalist stage, but did not win the prize. There was some pretty stiff competition. So I'm going to go and talk in New York about Tim there as well, and talk about the contributions that he made, not just to Canadian history, but to this kind of Atlantic community history that we've all talked about here, looking at France, looking at Britain, looking at the First World War, looking at the Empire, looking at Canada's place, not only in the British Empire, but in this relationship with the US as well. So it does speak to the fact that Tim's influence, his scholarship, all of that stretched far beyond, as we say, his own backyard.
And I think that, he was, someone said it in the cyber, he didn't gatekeep. History should be shared, which is what he did. And I think, we were talking about the fact his thirst for learning more clearly never left him. And also how he would reevaluate. You can see a change in his ideas, a reinforcement of some ideas. And he's also a progression in his ideas, because, he had a long career writing. And there are some people who, they've made their opinion back in 1976 and they've not changed it since. The fact that he was always wanting to engage with other people, he was clearly wanting to hear what their points of view were. That is a testament as well to his character. And I think, that's something that I will remember is that he didn't lose his enthusiasm. I'm assuming you would agree.
Oh, absolutely. And he welcomed me into that every time I came to Canada, into that community of Canadian scholars, as several other people here, Mike Bechtold and others, did for me as well, and welcomed me very warmly into those communities. Tim and I realized, I think, from the friendship perspective, just how much we had in common. Our families. We even had some of the same hockey teams that we cheered for and rooted for. And, Tim was one of those people, just that as you said, like Dennis Showalter, one of my mentors, that this is something that we should be sharing. We should be helping each other. We should be working together as a community as much as possible. And Tim did that not only as a researcher, I think, but as a museum professional, and of course, as a teacher as well. And I don't know if folks have talked much about that, but Tim was passionate about teaching as well. And I think it was only his love of the museum that kept him from leaving there for a full-time teaching post.
Yeah, no, definitely. And please let us know when you have to nip off, Mike. But if you want, you're welcome to stay. But if you have to nip off, let us know. And talking about museums, and we bring Alex Fitzgerald Black in because your work with the Juno Center is important, and he's 20+ years at the Canadian War Museum. It would be enough of a legacy without the books, without the teaching, without the appearing on podcasts. And we'll come to you in a minute, but just so you can say hello. Are you kind of here on behalf of the Juno Center and yourself because you knew him both via professionally and I guess personally as well, I assume?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. I feel like I'm wearing two hats today. I wasn't one of Tim's closest friends by any stretch. I went through the same thing that Carla Jean, alluded to earlier. I was a grad student at one point who never was a student with Tim, but yet he was so kind and gave me the time of day. I remember, when his book, The Fight to the Finish, came out in 2015, it actually cited one of my first academic articles. Honestly, if I look at it and I go back, I'm like, I'm not sure what he actually took from my piece in that, but it was still pretty awesome to see. And it just showed how he had such a breadth of reading that he did and pulling in new scholarship to engage a public audience, right? And that's really where Tim shone, I think, at least, as far as I knew him, as a public historian, and the impact he had on our many institutions in Canada. I mean, the Canadian War Museum, I can't really speak too directly to that, but obviously a massive impact for the Canadian War Museum. Alex earlier was talking about Legion magazine and all the writing he did for Legion magazine. And he's also done some writing and some work for the Juno Beach Center in the past. I mean, and we very much are inspired by a lot of his work. The Fight for History, which was kind of his third in a 3-volume set on the Second World War, more about the legacy of the war than the war itself, really played a big role in our redevelopment of what we call Room G at the Juno Beach Center, or Faces of Canada Today, and the Canada that emerged from the Second World War. In fact, one of Tim's quotes in the book is literally greeting people at the entrance to that display. He was over at the center in 2024 for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. He was, talking head with, I think it was CBC, did an amazing job at that, of course. And he would have seen that, and he was there for the inauguration of that room. He had some very nice things to say about the inauguration of that room to us. But he didn't take the limelight. And I'm sure he felt a little bit uncomfortable that we had used his quote in that way, and put it so prominently. But it was just such an important component of the museum. He was talking about, the veterans and the world they fought for, and when they came home, what they wanted to do, was build a better Canada. That was kind of the legacy of the Second World War. It wasn't so much let's build more monuments. Those things did happen, and we added names and added dates to, existing cenotaphs and war memorials, but it was really the Canada that emerged from the war. That was the legacy of that conflict. And he made that very clear in his writing, and we wanted a prominent place for that story in our exhibition.
I think I want to bring both mics in because you said something that I want to kind of drill down on. That's this fact he had respect for the veterans. He had respect for the commanders he wrote about, because we are 80+ years away from the Second World War. We're 100+ years away from the First World War. It's very easy now to be critical of people, of organizations, of generals, of commanders, of things like that. I never sensed any, even if he was being negative about somebody, he was respectful about that person as a human being. I think over the last 10 years, the cancer, it must have affected his mental outlook. It must have made him more appreciative of life and people and connections of human beings. But Mike Bechtold first. I mean, you've written about air commanders in World War II. You can easily slip into a thing where you're just bashing people. I don't see any bashing in Tim's book, and that's an incredible ability as a historian to offer your opinions about people, but keeping that respect. How important do you think that was in Tim's work?
Oh, it's absolutely essential. I mean, Tim never hesitated to say what needed to be said, but he never did it in a mean-spirited way. He never did it in an angry way. He always found a way to explain what happened and why it happened without being judgmental. And I think there's really a a huge lesson in that for all historians, in that we have to sort of write about the times as they were understood by the participants, not bring our 21st century sensibilities to it and judge based on what we know today. And Tim was absolutely masterful at that.
Thank you. And Mike Nyberg, you would agree, I guess. He could, as Mike said, he could point out faults, but do it in a nice way.
Well, I think some of that came from the methodological ways that he approached history, and he and I had a lot of conversations about that too. His access to the archives at the museum. His wife was an archivist with the National Library of Canada, Libraries and Archives of Canada, excuse me. So Tim was a great believer in going back to the sources, and he was a great believer in doing what we're all trained to do, but not everybody does it, which is to begin with a hypothesis, test that hypothesis against the evidence. And if the evidence goes against one of your prior held beliefs, you follow the evidence and you write based on what the sources and what the documents say. And that doesn't mean that you don't make powerful arguments, but it means you stated the things that you can support and you stated the things that you can back up. And, the more we're having this conversation, the more I'm starting to realize that though their personalities were quite different, Tim and Dennis Showalter really did have a lot in common, because Dennis was very much the same way. Dennis had his views and he had his opinions, but he didn't publish anything unless it was supported by documents that he himself had seen. And Tim believed in that deeply as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It comes from not coming in with fixed opinions. It comes with coming in the way we're all trained to do it. You come in with research questions and you go and you look for the evidence that sustains or refutes the thesis that you've begun with. And, that's something we're all trained to do, but not everybody actually does.
Yeah, no. And anyone else got to drop out immediately, or who should I go to next? Are we all here for a few more minutes? I mean, I haven't had Jim in for a while. Jim, you're listening to people like Mike Nyberg, Mike Bechtold talk, and you said you come at this from your work with Arras and Vimy, and in terms of the Great War aspect of things. I mean, as I said earlier, he wrote about the First World War and the Second World War. Is there any single thing you think he gave to the First World War study that is important to either you or the Great War group more generally?
I think carrying on from what the discussion was just then, there's no, in the sense of you can sometimes say that a lot of history of the First World War that's written by British people is Anglo-centric. In other words, it really concentrates on what happens with the British Army, what happens to the British, and everybody else tends to fade into the background. And that was the fault of much literature, early literature from Canada. And I think the first book that I ever saw from Canada that really started to look at it a little bit more broadly, and a lack of nationalism enhanced in it. It wasn't the great Canada. Was in fact, and he's there now, Mike, was Mike's book on Arras, the reassessment. Because I saw that, and for the first time, it was like, oh, some Canadians actually do see that other things were happening, and that it wasn't the Canadians who invented everything that happened on Vimy Ridge, etc., that sort of thing. And then all my discussion with him, it was always about the people involved. It didn't matter whether they were Canadian, and from the First World War, it was really just Canadian or British. It didn't matter whether they were Canadian or British or anything else. It was just the men and how they were regarding what they were doing and how they were fighting. And he, as Mike was saying, it was all based on what he was looking up in terms of sources. That was the other thing which was so important for me, having spent days in the National Archives in London to prepare for mine. It was heartbreaking to see some Canadian literature almost ignore the primary sources. And he didn't. And he was able to present something which would be appealing to Canadians reading it, so they would see how their soldiers and how their soldiers fought, but not over-egging it, so that anybody reading it from outside would think, oh God, this is just a Canadian going on and on about the Canadians and how brilliant they are. He wasn't. He was critical in a very sort of, and again, as Mike said, where he found the sources made it right to be critical, he was. And then he'd be critical of the British, but he'd also be supportive of the British. For example, Mike's book and his book are some of the only ones which really, on a Canadian literature point of view, point out how much British influence there was at Vimy. I mean, bringing that sort of First World War centric argument to Tim's work, he was willing to go outside that nationalistic central box that unfortunately writers can't do, and that includes UK writers.
So, Carla, I want people saying how good he was at understanding archives and going back to primary sources, but he didn't strike me as someone who was also dismissive of modern methods. I mean, we talked earlier about the fact he had appeared on podcasts, he appeared on World War II TV. Your work with photos. It seems that you'd have to be embracing of modern technology, working as he did at the museum there. So, how would you define him in terms of the more modern aspects of history, the sharing of it and using other medias and things like that to convey history? Because as we've talked about, he was able to do teaching, lecturing, museum work, writing books. How was he with new methods?
Mm-hmm. I think Tim just was so passionate about being a public historian and really meeting the public where they were. And that can mean a lot of things. That can mean appearing on a podcast and being so generous with his time to show up in just a variety of different avenues, right? And I it's my understanding that he was open to presenting perhaps like colorized photographs in the museum space if that's a way that you're going to get people interested in their history. So I think he really was just the consummate public historian. How do we bring the history of Canadian military to the people? How do we find ways to engage with them? And I think one thing we're all talking about is that Tim really knew how to, he was so passionate about walking his talk, right? If he was going to write endlessly about making sure that people know their history, then he was going to be the one to write it, but he was going to be the one to encourage young people to write it too. And such a helper to others. And I guess that's the legacy, right? Jim was talking about how do you embody Tim Cook, or how do you have the Tim Cook model? And it's be generous with your time, be kind to others, don't gatekeep, be encouraging, be helpful, be supportive. And I think that's such a wonderful legacy. I think after Tim's passing, we all read hundreds upon hundreds of comments on all these different posts about just nothing but kind words to be shared. And I think that's so incredible. And I think that's the legacy that we all need to embody moving forward.
No, definitely. I mean, the fact that everybody's sitting here talking about him is very good. And I want to bring Mike Nyberg in one last time, and then I'll try and reduce the number of people down because we've got other people coming in later on. I mean, Mike, I know you've been talking about AI and things like that recently. And it seems to me that Tim Cook would have been the sort of person that would go, okay, well, this is a thing that's going to be coming in. What is the best of it? What is the worst of it? Because from, and that, it was mentioned earlier on, I've got my copy of The Fight for History there. Understanding historiography, understanding how the appreciating history has changed through the eras. We thought about it a certain way in the 1950s. We thought about it a different way in the 80s. We're thinking about a different way now. And as David O'Keefe said earlier, we have to carry on pushing forwards with this. So how do you think Tim Cook would have faced the challenges of history is changing, the way we are learning, the way we are sharing history? I got a bit ranty on Facebook a couple of days ago about AI. How do you think Tim Cook would have moved forward with that sort of technology?
Well, I think Carla Jean hit it. I mean, when you're a public historian, you need to reach the public where the public is. And, Tim flying all the way to Australia for that conference was very much a part of that because it was hosted by museums in Australia. He wanted to see how they were handling these kinds of problems. He and I had a few early conversations about some of the ways that AI was changing the way that we were presenting things here in the Army. I could imagine a lot more of our sort of Zoom catch-up calls in the middle of winter when neither of our hockey teams were doing particularly well, turning to exactly this topic. How do you reach younger people? How do you again reach people where they are? How do you figure out a way to tell that story within the way that your society is changing and evolving? And Tim, I never knew Tim to shy away from anything that would help to tell that story, anything that he thought might help to tell that story in a better, more intellectual way. And I think that's the other thing, museum studies, they have all these things, you're supposed to write to a 7th grade level, or you're supposed to never write more than 20 words or whatever. And that was never the way I saw Tim approach anything. So I can only imagine we would have had a lot of really, really interesting conversations about what to do about that. And again, I think it speaks to all the things that we've been talking about here. Tim was never a one-dimensional thinker. He was never a one-dimensional scholar. He was never one-dimensional in the way that he presented his material. So I think we would have had some fascinating conversations about interesting ways to apply this technology to where we are now, and as several folks have said on this call, how to reach the next generation, because we are, of course, and Tim and I definitely had these conversations. We're reaching young people now that have no memory of people who served in the war, where their personal attachments to it are no longer what they were for our generation, and that requires new levels of engagement, and that requires new levels of thinking.
Well, thank you, Mike Nyberg. We'll drop you out now.
I've got to jump off and go back to family here, but Woody, thanks again for
Mike.
doing this.
Great talking to you again. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you all in person soon.
And Carla, you're going to go in a minute too. But Carla, final words. If in 20 years' time, perhaps you're mentoring a younger historian, and someone says, what was Tim Cook like? What would your opening gambit be?
Well, I mean, I wrote a little post about Tim, and it took me a while to gather what I wanted to say. But what I ultimately wrote was that Tim taught us it's okay to meet your heroes. And so that's all I can really say about him, was that I'm so fortunate to have ever met him and to have read his words, but to have a conversation, and he was so kind. So Tim made it okay to meet your heroes, and that's what I want to say about him. Okay, well, thanks. It's been great talking to you, and it's testament again to how much he was loved by people that you're here. But there's other people who haven't had much. Brad and Norma haven't said anything yet. So thanks. Have a great weekend, and we'll speak soon. Thanks for doing this. Thank you. Bye. So we're getting back to a smaller. So Brad, we've been sitting there waiting, but then I'll bring Norma and Alex. And Brad, you interviewed him on your channel. You obviously are inspired by him. You've heard what other people have said. What's your first opening line about what Tim Cook meant to you, or your initial reaction?
That's thanks again for doing this. What do you want to say that first and having me on? I really appreciate it. It's hard to say. I just have so many great memories with Tim. I literally worked for him. I don't even know, lost track. He would always do his best to help me get work, being in Ottawa myself and the War Museum, and always trying to help me out. So that was always great. The news hit me really, really hard. Not going to lie about that. It was not unexpected, as so many others have said.
Yeah.
But it still hurt. It still hurt a lot. He just done so much for me. Such a great guy. One of my favorite memories of working with him at the museum itself, just before COVID, actually. He always said in his talks about how he'd love to go through the museum every day and just take in what people were doing and conversations and everything like that. And that's true. He was not one to boast just to fill in for a speech or something like that. I'd be sitting at my desk doing whatever, and he'd be like, Brad, come here. And then we would just go through the museum. Like, that was always great. And he'd ask me, what I was doing in my PhD and what else I had going on. And he was always interested in anything I was working on, even if it was non-history. That was always great to hear him be so interested. And just one thing I thought of when you guys were talking about his involvement with new things, it's I worked for somebody else, and we put some TikTok videos out, and I didn't think he used TikTok. And he talked to me about how he thought they were great and how he got to see them, and thinks that's a good idea for moving forward. So that was just always great that he's, he kept track of what people were doing, and was always so happy to talk about what people had going on, and give his best and all that stuff. And yeah, it was always great to talk to him. And yeah, he did that just before he passed, so that was a good memory to have. Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to him again in a minute. But Jim is going to drop out in a minute. So Jim, you like me, you've spent a lot of time on the battlefields, and I definitely, when I was guiding full time, I definitely would hear Tim's words and think about some of the things he wrote about in terms of how to share history, not just the history, but how to present history, how to share it, how to connect with people, because it's all very well knowing stuff. Being able to communicate it to other people is a trick, as you know from both writing and guiding. And any final words you want to say about Tim Cook's legacy in terms of a battlefield guide, someone who spends time on the battlefields?
I think it's as Carla said, it's the ability to be supportive of other people around you, and therefore as a guide It's being supportive of the people you've got actually with you in. And most of my customers that I had were Canadians, ironically. And so a lot of the time I was working, it was Tim's words and Tim's encouragement. And it was a mantra to me that I would help them move on. And also I work a lot with people who want to guide now, teaching them about guiding. And it's the same idea about presenting this ability to share your thoughts without any prejudices. I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was talking about the non-nationalistic type thing. Sharing non-prejudice. I hear guides sometimes, and there's a prejudice to some of what I hear, and it's getting that not in your presentations when you're doing it, and you're not being judgmental. You're giving people the facts and let them make their minds up about it, and that's exactly what Tim did, and that was an influence on me all the way through from when I first started contacting back in 14, 15. All the way through to our lack of contact afterwards. But that's the last one for me, really. That legacy of sharing with everyone, not just your chosen few.
I agree, and thank you very much. And I think, and I'm going to echo and ask Norman to bring, it's not just the sharing, it's the keeping the enthusiasm. You know, we talked at the beginning about there are some books you read where you need to read them because you need to understand information, but it feels a bit of a chore. And at the end of it, you need to have a break from history. You don't get that when you read a Tim Cook book. When you finish a Tim Cook book, you just want to start another Tim Cook book or a David O'Keefe book or a Mike Bechtold book or whoever it would be, because that fire, that enthusiasm was clearly there. So Jim, thanks very much for joining us. We've got someone else joining us now, and then I will come to you, Norma. You've been sitting there very patiently, but thanks, Jim. It's great to hear the words of a fellow Brit who has spent time in France, and your story was great. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Phil. Lovely to meet everyone. Bye.
Right, so this is a guest as invited by Mike Bechtold. So Emily Andrews. So another welcome to that, and I will come to you, Norm. We've got two newbies who haven't spoken yet. So Emily, Mike just sent me a message. You work with Tim professionally, publishing wise. So tell us about how you knew him and what your memories were of Tim. Hello.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's so weird because I just got, when I entered the room, I heard your voice live. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. And sir, I have to sign out and then re-sign back in because there's a delay and I can hear them both simultaneously.
Okay, we'll drop you out and I'll talk to Norma then. Okay, no problem. See you in a minute. So Norma, you've been sitting there patiently. So, you know, I feel that I feel a bit like you in this. I feel unworthy of being part in some ways of a chat about Tim Cook because I'm not an academic historian. I haven't got a PhD. I can't discuss working in classrooms and doing that. I can't. I'm just a YouTuber who made it, I suppose.
I was going to actually talk about Tim. I was not privileged to be a friend or a colleague of Tim's. I met him once. Brad, you know Serafina, that works at the museum. I was at the Society for Military History conference a couple of years ago in Washington, and I made Serafina. I dragged her over and made her introduce me to Tim, and then proceeded to stand there and just blather something inane because I was so overwhelmed at meeting my hero. So that was the only time I actually got to meet him. But I'm going to talk about Tim because I was a librarian for many years, and I'm going to talk about him from that perspective. He was, of course, a brilliant historian. He was able to bridge the gulf between academic and popular history. His work was carefully researched and evidence-based, but it was so readable that when people would come into the library and say, you know, I want to read something about the war, you know, First World War, Second World War, whatever, I'd say, you got to read Tim Cook. I always made it a point whenever his new book came out, I would buy it for the library because they were very popular. He was able to blend a really flowing narrative, storytelling, really beautiful storytelling, with insightful analysis that it was blended so skillfully that you couldn't see the join. and for now that I'm back at university, at my advanced age, I'm finding that the endnotes and bibliographies in his books are an absolute motherlode. If I need to find something, I'll go and look in the back of one of Tim's books. And just after he passed, one of the military history groups that I follow on social media, the Canadian Military Photos Lost and Found, it's called, someone named Jenny Lee said that Tim helped Canadians see our history not as something to memorize, but as something to feel. And that resonated so strongly with me as in my experience, and the experience of my patrons at the library who when reading Tim's books, he was able to write military history with huge compassion. And if that sounds like it doesn't, those things don't go together, you haven't read Tim's books, because that's one of the first things that kind of jumps out at you when you read them. I don't know if Ted is Ted going to be on today? He's another one.
Ted is joining us anytime, I think. Yeah.
Ted Barris can pull that off too, quite well, but Tim was masterful at it. And as Mike was saying, the people that are in his books are fully human, good and bad, but he treats everyone so even-handedly and with such compassion. Mike, you know what I'm like. I need to take a page from that, because I'm, and Brad, you and I have that in common. We tend to kind of.
You're pretty vocal in the sidebar on World War II TV about certain generals. I'm thinking of a particular couple that come up quite frequently and incur your wrath.
Yeah, maybe I need to take a page from Tim's book and be a little bit more understanding. I'll try. He was also a passionate advocate for Canadians telling our own stories. And in The Fight for History, which I think of all his books, I mean, I love them all, but that book really is standout for me.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, he wrote, "History is messy, tangled, and complex. It is unsettled and contradictory. It takes effort to understand, and its meaning changes from generation to generation. But we must push back against apathy and indifference. We must tell our stories truthfully and bravely, for if we do not embrace our history, no one else will."
Wow.
There. That's me.
I mean, you're right, and I'm thinking that when you were talking there, Norma, I was thinking about my late friend Colin, who died a couple of months ago, whose birthday was 2 days ago, and when he was guiding in Normandy, that people would ask for certain books. There'd be books they would say, "What's the best book on?" And he would say a title, and he said, "But that's not for you." He would say that's going to be too heavy going for you. It's going to put you off the subject. Tim Cook, I think, had that, as you said, the ability that you would give a book of his to someone confidently that they're not going to get bored with it, they're not going to lose focus, because he just wrote really well. And Mike, you've written several tomes. It must be, in some ways, must be quite annoying to know someone who it seems so effortlessly for Tim Cook, because I'm in the middle of starting to write now, and I find the whole process really difficult. I judge myself harshly every day. How a good a writer was Tim from your point of view? I mean, I'm assuming you echo what Norma said there.
Yeah, no, Tim was an outstanding writer, and I don't think it was easy for him. I don't think writing's easy for anyone, but he makes it look easy, and that's the real trick. And just to amplify what Norma and some others have said, Tim was one of the best at bridging that divide between academic historians and popular historians. Academic historians have a reputation, probably well earned, for knowing their topic but not communicating it very well. Yes, they can write, but they don't always write in the most accessible, easy to read way. General historians can often be better writers, but sometimes they miss out on some of the finesse of the topic,
the nuance,
the interpretation, the context. But Tim was a master at both sides of that. He was writing cutting-edge history based on primary sources and the best understanding of the historiography, but he wrote it in an easy to read, easy to understand way that could be picked up by just about anyone. And I've recommended his books to everyone from fellow academics to high school students, because I know that they all will get something out of it. And that's a special talent, and it's one that we've lost.
Yeah. And Mike, I know you've been in since early on, so I will have to say goodbye to you because we've got other people coming in there. Before I say goodbye to you, you came on by saying how you'd known him a long time, and you're struggling to sort of accept the fact we're talking about him in the past tense. Have you got any kind of funny stories? Or you said that the first talk you heard was not particularly great, but because he was a human being as well, and I sensed that when he would come on live with me, he could be a bit cheeky as well. He could be a little bit irreverent. So any funny stories? Then we'll bring Emily in.
Yeah, one that I love to hear. Anyone who knows Roger Sardi will get this. But Roger worked at the War Museum, was Tim's boss at the War Museum, and Roger had he's retired from Laurier now, and he was is a very senior historian in Canada, and met a lot of people and did a lot of things. And when Tim was writing his history of Canadian historians, what's the title of the book? I can't remember right now. He said that he always wanted to get Roger's ideas, and it was always tough to pin him down because Roger was always so busy and never had time to just sit down and chat. But at the time, Roger was a pipe smoker, so Tim would keep a close eye on Rog, and when he went outside to have a smoke, he would follow him down and go for a walk with him, and just like pump him for information and get stories. And that's how we got it. Yes, Cleo's Warriors. Thanks, Alex. But he just, that was his method. He would get the information any way he could. And with Roger, that was the best way to do it. And he found a way.
Brilliant. Well, Mike, we've got John Hickman's waking you. So I will say goodbye. Thank you very much for being part of this, because someone had to say yes first. And I think you were the first to actually say yes. And, putting together a tribute show, I didn't think it would be tricky, and it wasn't tricky because everybody just came on, and there's people who can't be on but who would like to be on. Nala Ayed wanted to be on, but she's busy working. And we must all echo David O'Keefe's words and try and keep on keeping on, I suppose, and carry on with his legacy. So Mike, thank you for sharing some of your thoughts with us, and we'll see you again in the new year. You're coming on talking about Air Power in Normandy. You're doing a whole series of shows with us, so we'll look forward to that.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And thanks again for doing this, Woody. This is essential stuff.
Thank you. So that's goodbye to Mike. Emily, would you like to share a few words?
Sure. Sorry for earlier. Very 20th century tech mind I have, but I'm among historians, so that's a good place to have such a mind. Tim was my very first author as a scholarly editor. I was working at UBC Press. We worked on No Place to Run and Cleo's Warriors together. And in my 28-year career working in university presses, I've published 2 books that started as master's theses. One was Tim's, No Place to Run. And of course, it went on to win the C.P. Stacey Award for Best Book in Canadian Military History that year. I knew he was extraordinary. This is not just sort of looking back on the past with the lens of where I am today. I just knew his prose was kind of straining at the academic reins. Even then, there were so many adjectives. I wasn't used to that as a scholarly editor. There were so many people. That was revelatory when he started writing. He was really writing a ground up form of history in every way, and I found it very refreshing. At the time, Tim connected me to folks at the Canadian War Museum, and due to Tim's connection, we started a series, Studies in Canadian Military History, which is now Jack Granatstein calls the best series in Canada, book publication series. And it's just amazing how Tim, for us, and when I say us, I mean Canadian military historians, the group I know, as well as us publishing people, he was like our nucleus. Just to riff a bit off what Mike was just saying about Roger Sarti, last night I was having drinks actually with Raj and Jack Granatstein, and a great part of our conversation was taken up talking about Tim and the profound legacy he had, and just really the way he touched us. We all know what a great dad he was, but that is certainly worth saying, because every time I was in touch with him, the first thing he would tell me about was his girls, as he called them, and ask about my son as well. The second thing I want to say about him, boy, I'm looking at his beautiful brown smiling eyes now and just grinning back at him, but such a hopeful face, right? And he was always the young scholar in the room, the unsure scholar in the room, and quite often in these spaces, the woman scholar in the room. And he was always encouraging to people who maybe hadn't felt that they could speak up in these spaces before. And really, even if they said something that was quite mundane or quotidian, and believe me, I was at an AHA workshop where somebody said something and he just made her feel brilliant for this question she had asked. And I thought that was a real skill and a real gift as well. I have the great pleasure of one of Tim's co-edited collections is forthcoming with my current publishing house. So to me that, and when I went to the conference on which this book was based, my goodness, to see an audience of people staring at Tim as though he were a superstar. And Tim, you know, we all know him. He was just so modest and humble and like, this is the way it is. This is the way they want to stare at me, but I'm still here doing history. So on that vein, the very last memory I want to share was this summer in August, I went to a very small town in Ontario called Meaford. And Meaford has a base. It's right on Georgian Bay. Meaford has a base. And because I'm a bit of a hippie by heart, I went to the farmer's market, and the librarian, because people don't go to libraries as much anymore, the librarian brought a traveling library to the farmer's market. And what was there is a big poster behind her book, Carol, but this very poster of Tim that I'm staring at right now. And he was coming to Meaford to give a talk. This was, I guess, in early to mid-August, give a talk on his latest book. And I remember the librarian gushing at me. She said, I just went on the War Museum's website and I found his email address, and I thought in a million years he wouldn't write back to me, but he wrote back to me. And I just thought this guy was inexhaustible. He always said yes to a peer review request when I asked him to read a manuscript for me, and he did a great job. He always mentored young people compassionately and well. He was somebody who wanted enrichment about our nation's military past. He was there. He was always doing it, and he gave so much of himself, and I really believe that's why he's touched such a broad range of us so incredibly deeply. So I am profoundly thankful to Tim intellectually, and also as a good friend. I think a lot of us feel like he was a good friend, and what a character that bespeaks. That's it for me.
Well, thank you, Emily. That's been great to hear you. I didn't know you were going to come on. And it's just of Mike. It's been fantastic to share some of the other aspects of it now. So I will drop you out if that's okay, because I have another guest in the waiting. It's so nice to talk to you, and thank you very much for sharing your. Thank you so much. Thank you. But in the meantime, I'm going to bring Ted in a minute. I'm going to bring John in a minute. But Alex, you wanted to say something as well before you drop out as well. So again, you know, your connection with the Juno Centre, but also elsewhere. What was it you wanted to say about Tim?
Yeah, so really, I wanted to share one last story, but also I just wanted to share the quote. I think everybody can see that now. Perhaps I don't know if you've put it up there, Woody. That's the quote.
Hang on. How do I do it? Where is it? Are you sharing screen?
I am sharing the screen. Yes.
I can't see it. Oh, there we are. Hang on. There we go.
We've got so many windows to manage here today.
I've got to take someone else. Hang on. I've got to take someone out. Hang on. There it should come up in a minute. I've got to work out how to do it. Hang on.
No problem. Well, this is just the quote that I had alluded to earlier that's at the Juno Beach Center, and it's part of our Faces of Canada Today gallery, and it's what really
I know, I've got to remove a video. Hang on.
Whenever
There we go. Finally, there we go.
That was part of the tribute that the Juno Beach Center posted, shortly after Tim's passing. So you can read that to yourself, and his writing is just so incredible, and so it was pretty hard, to try to summarize that in a better way. So we said, let's just put Tim in there, and I'm really pleased we did that. The other story I was going to share about Tim, and the privilege of working for the Juno Beach Center is I meet a lot of historians over in Normandy. David O'Keefe, who was on earlier, I've had nice chats with him on Juno Beach, for example, and Woody, obviously, I've had the pleasure of meeting you a couple times. And I met Tim over there again in 2024, again for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And this was a couple of days before D-Day. He was preparing, to be the color analyst for CBC and prepping things, the day or two before. And I remember getting a message from Tim. I can't remember how it came to my phone because I didn't actually have full service. So it must have come when I had some sort of internet connection. And I didn't see it. And we were, on the next town over from the Juno Beach Center, outside of Courcelles-sur-Mer, and he asked, Alex, do you? I remember the name of the hedgehogs, the anti-tank obstacle, but what's this other one? That basically looks like a pyramid that actually is a hollow pyramid. And I actually couldn't message him back, so we basically were in our rental car and we rushed back to the museum. And I found Tim and went, "Hey Tim, it's a tetrahedron." And he said, "Oh, thanks so much, Alex. Really appreciate that. No, by the way, I'm blanking on the name of the news anchor, the CBC news anchor, Adrienne Arsenault is, and he introduced me to her and said, this is Alex. He's the executive director of the Juno Beach Center Association." And so I just got that introduction to Adrienne Arsenault, and he was doing it because he wants to help the Juno Beach Center. He wants to get us in the eyes of Canadians and that sort of thing. And so it just kind of underlines a lesson from Tim is always pay it forward, right? He's paid it forward to me so many times, so I felt so compelled to pay it forward to him. And then on the other end, he was still doing the same thing. And the last thing I'll say is just to echo, especially what Norma had said. And I didn't know Tim Cook all that well personally, but I very much get the sense he was a very passionate, patriotic Canadian. That came through in a lot of his work. And that fight for history, he believes, needs to continue because if nobody, this is a bit of a thing for Canada, and it's probably a thing for other nations as well. But if we don't tell our story, nobody else is going to do that. And Ted does that so well, and so many of the others here do that so well. And Tim, that was just always a focal point for Tim, and it's kind of natural in me, but it invigorates me, and I can't wait to continue to be able to do the work I do to continue Tim's legacy.
Well, thank you. That's the final way to finish up, and I will bring Ted Barrett in. Norman's going to say one last word. I'm going to bring Brad in. I haven't had John's been sitting there patiently waiting. It's such a testament to Tim's legendary status. So thanks, Alex. Great to hear from you. I'll bring Ted in a second, and Norma, I'll come back to you in a minute, but I'll bring in Ted in first. So thanks, Alex. Nice to talk to you again. We'll see each other in due course. Thanks. So Ted, you've been sitting there patiently waiting. Talking about legends of Canadian history, you're another one. What's you've been hearing to other people talk about Tim Cook there? What was your first thought of Tim when you heard about his passing?
I remembered the times that, to pick up on Alex's thought of how much Tim paid it forward, never stopped giving, particularly to other historians, whether they were amateurs, professionals of his stature or not. I met him probably 20 years ago when I was working on research for my book about Vimy Ridge, and visited the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, and he dropped everything when he discovered I was there and took me to places in the museum I probably wouldn't have searched, particularly in its archives, and directed my attention to things he thought might help me, and indeed they did. In one instance, the Battle of Vimy Ridge in April of 1917 was prefaced by a fascinating gas attack that occurred up towards the Pimple and in late March of 1917. I didn't even know about it. And he, again, stopped, directed me to the source material, made me aware of it, recognized why that would be helpful to me. And then as a result of that tip, he directed me to further research, particularly on gas attacks that I didn't read, because he'd done, as Emily was pointing out, that extraordinary book that he wrote, No Place to Run, focused me in that location. What was probably most important about that experience initially was that Tim and I didn't agree completely on the significance of Vimy. I was much more, I guess, in the stream of Canadian history writers who had a sense that Vimy played a role in our founding as a nation. And I found lots of material to bring that presentation forward. Tim didn't always agree with me on that, and yet he never stopped me from finding the material that I needed to help buttress that particular position. And we often talked about it in public, but he was always open to another view. He didn't think that his research was definitive. And that went on throughout his career. He was always open-minded, whether he was on the air, whether he was writing, whether he was meeting people at the museum, whether, just like Alex, I kept bumping into Tim all the time overseas, whether it was in France or in Belgium, and we'd always share stories on the road, on the fly, promoting books and talking about each other's work. But the other thing that was neat too, my last connection with Tim was when he and Andrew Birch were preparing a book on the Korean War. The book consists of, it's quite a massive volume, and it consists mostly of academic work. And I sense he came to me because he wanted a slightly different voice, because most of the people in the book have been gathering history and writing about it in universities and in academic scholarly works forever. I have not. And I think he sensed that I might add a slightly different take on the Korean War. In fact, it was right in my sweet spot. He wanted to know what it was like for a Korean War veteran to come home to Canada and how they were treated. And that I had plenty of material of. And I was delighted that he asked me to, invited me in. And then he edited the work very tastefully, very carefully. And whether he agreed with my position or not, welcomed it. And it was just that relationship he had with us. When I've gone elsewhere around the world and met other historians in Britain or the United States or Poland or wherever, there's an unfortunate competitiveness that exists between or among historians. Not in this country, principally because Tim has fostered that fascination that we all have for our history and trying to move it forward, get it to more ears and eyes. He was at the forefront of that, whether he was sitting in the museum or working with us out in the field. He cared about keeping, just as Alex said, keeping the Canadian profile high and making sure that every point of view was included.
He was certainly in the center of a whole lot of Venn diagrams, wasn't he? His overlap, his reach. We keep coming back to this idea of being a popular historian and embracing all the different aspects. But Norma, before you drop out, you gave us a wonderfully emotional and evocative summing up of how you see Tim Cook. But a final word before you leave us.
I guess I'm lucky that my experience of dealing with professional military historians has been very positive. And in this country, I think, Tim, as other people have said, Tim set the bar for kindness, for being generous of spirit. And that's certainly been my experience, and I hope to be able to pay it forward.
Thank you, Norma.
But Woody, thank you so much for doing this. We've been grieving in our own separate silos since this happened, and I think it's very good to get together and talk about this.
Well, one of my reasons for doing it, is about me, is that the internet feels fantastic when you're just sharing information, but when you're going through grief, I think having some sort of actual proper exchange about this is important. You know, it's all very well exchanging ideas about, as you sent me yesterday, do I recognize this church in Normandy? I did recognize the church in Normandy, but I think it's also good just sometimes to be a little bit, open about our feelings. And so Norma, it's been great talking to you. I hope I will be, we have ways next. Will you be there next year? I don't know, but I'll see you at some point.
Thank you.
Come to Normandy. Come to
You,
Normandy.
love you, Woody. I will.
Love you too. See you. And Ted, I will come back to you, but I'm going to bring John in, because John, I think John, like Alex, who started off there, I think your word's going to be really important here, because you're an American who now has this big connection with Canada. You're the tattoo destroyer on YouTube. I think it's fair to say, like me, though you teach, although you're doing other aspects, is that you felt on a lower rung than Tim Cook when as I felt a lower rung with Tim Cook. So you've been listening to what the people said there. I'm assuming you're going to echo what everyone else said about how welcoming he was and what an inspiration he was. But what's your opening thought about it?
Oh yeah, I have to echo a lot of what's been said already, and I've been in the chat since before 2 o'clock when we got underway, Woody, and it's just been great to see how people have discussed Tim's work and his outreach. I know that I was introduced to Tim's works when I first went to the Canadian War Museum 15 years ago, and I saw At the Sharp End, and I saw Shock Troops, and I didn't have a lot of money back then, but I wanted to buy those books for some reason. I wanted to find out more about the First World War and Canadian history, because I didn't learn it in the United States. And so I'm like, I got to be different. I got to figure this out. And Tim's books were the ones that I grabbed. And it just took me on a course that led me, as a young person who was considering moving to Canada, it made me want to consider it even more, because I saw an opportunity to maybe give back to a place that really has a lot of meaning to me and a lot of joy through vacationing here with family since I was 9 months old. And then when I started the Tattooed Historian, I've interviewed authors, including Ted, and I've had you on, Paul, and I have yet to get Brad on, but I'm sure there'll be a time where you get Brad on as well, and everyone else was here. It was about 4 years ago, the publisher reached out and said, "Do you want to interview Tim Cook?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to interview Tim. That'd be fantastic. I've corresponded with him once before, but I'd love to have him on and discuss the fight for history." And so that led to us actually corresponding more and more. And we had our live stream discussion, and he came back on and did Lifesavers and Body Snatchers, and then came back on and did The Good Allies last year. And he knew through talking to me, like, when you're doing a live stream, you're talking to people who are coming on behind the scenes. You're saying, "Hey, we're going to come on, we're going to talk about this." Well, Tim's immediate thing was always, "Hey, how are you doing? What do you need anything right now?" And sometimes I was a little too honest with Tim, and I thought, I'm having difficulty because I didn't get this this gig that I really wanted, or whatever the case was. And he always had a positive word to say to me. And it wasn't until about 2023, he said to me, he's like, "Well, we could use you up here." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, Tim Cook is telling me that they could use my, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if I call it talent, but whatever, in Canada." And I'm like, wow, that's huge for me. This person who I've been looking up to is like a figurehead, someone who's the torchbearer, is saying, "Hey, we could use, some of your talents up here," or whatever. And he was so supportive. And we had the one thing in common where we're both enablers. We love to tell people, "Go for it. You can do it. Just keep going." And I found that in him, which was rare, because we said the word competition came up earlier. And man, that's huge where I come from. And so to have someone who's an enabler and is like, "Just go, just do it. Just, you figure it out as you go, or if you need me, I'll be there." That was a huge boost to me. And I honestly probably wouldn't be in Canada if it wasn't for him. And his tutelage, because he really pushed me to consider getting an academic, getting through it with academia and stuff up here in a PhD program, and really pushed me to be like, "Hey, choose a good program and just move forward and enjoy it. And that was his legacy for me, which is full of positivity, always there, always an email away. And he was so many people's cheerleader, which was great.
No, definitely. And I want to bring both Brad and Ted in there, because Ted, you said something about the fact that you had slight disagreements about Vimy Ridge and Carrillo. And Brad, I think how people are as a historian is how you deal with when you don't agree with each other. It's all very well when you're sitting in a room and you all agree completely on a particular subject. You know, let's say we all agree about whatever it would be, the particular prowess of a particular unit on D-Day. But when we talk about something like, and as Tim was last time with me, we were talking about Kurt Meyer, we were talking about murders at the Abbey d'Ardenne. You've done lots of work on your channel about the 12th SS and Canadians. I sense that if me, you, and Tim were in a pub, we would agree on some things, but there'd be some things we'd have slightly different opinions, because the facts we probably agree on, but the interpretation. How important to you, Brad, is it that Tim was someone who would engage and keep on talking and not? I have had historians who've kind of thrown but I'm an academic historian, you're just a YouTuber at a couple of occasions, and okay, fair, but Tim wasn't like that as a person, was he? He would engage with you even if you disagreed. How important is that as a quality in anybody, and particularly in Tim, Brad?
Oh, I mean, it was actually, I have a story that's kind of related to that.
Super.
Not that we disagreed, but it was, I don't know, I was naive, youngish when I started my PhD. I thought, hey, I have a good topic that no one's going to look at, and it was Vimy related, so problem number one. But I didn't know Tim was going to be presenting his brand new, amazing book on, the legacy of Vimy Ridge and all of that.
Sorry.
We got Dave on there. Sorry, yeah. So he I should have known he was going to do a whole treatment, because the conference was about Vimy. So I thought, hey, I'll look at why the national memorial's on Vimy, like literally why it's on that hill. And doing all that research was fantastic. I used his books to find sources that couldn't find otherwise. But why, it wasn't necessarily a disagreement, but I think again, it's been said multiple times, he was always wanting to learn. And yeah, because he was at my talk, which was amazing. And then he mentioned it during his keynote, which kind of almost, gave me a little bit of a heart attack in a good way, because I had done nothing in history at that point. But he was asking me like, oh, it's came down to my conclusions was about the roads and the construction and all that stuff. So it was fantastic to get him to be like, yeah, that's amazing that, he's able to talk about that and, learn from someone who has barely done any historical research in a very long time, or very little at that point in my career. And it was just great. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, we did have something we disagreed about in one of the Laurier conference that so many of us have been to. It was very minor, but he did it in a respectful way, and it was a learning experience, I think, for both of us. So that was a great experience again, because that was a bit later on as well, and getting to learn things, and from having some of the big names. I think Roger Chardy was literally standing next to him at the time, so it was it was pretty cool. But if you'll allow me, I'll just wanted to share a couple stories.
Yeah, please do.
Then I'll bump off. But I know so many people have said this before, and it is literally why Tim is why I do what I do. It's hard to explain a lot of personal details and some misfortunes in my life, but I had a period where I was off work and I started reading, and I found shock troops. I hadn't really done much with World War I at all. This is still a copy I have. I wasn't sure. I was kind of naive again, and didn't think, historians could, academic historians could write well in an engaging way. And then I found Tim's book, and then I read it, and I went, this can be done. You can get that academic background. You can do this properly, in that sense of going through the sources properly and all that good stuff, and still engage the public. And that changed everything for me. Everything. And the path I've been on and all the great people I've got to meet as a result come from Tim. And I think that's why, sorry if I start crying again, but why Tim's death hit me so hard is because I don't have what I have now without him. And I told him that once, and he was so,
wow,
humble about it, and just saying he wanted to share the stories like I like to do. And it was a lot. It meant a lot to me, and it still does. So, I mean, I wouldn't know you without Tim and all everybody else in this. journey I've been on. So it's an amazing thing. And I got to see him just before he passed, a couple of weeks before a conference that was at the War Museum about vets. And same message he always had, and how we have to share the stories and how we have to get everybody involved and everything like that. And I had no idea he was sick, honestly. I knew he'd had his illnesses over the years. I don't know, maybe it was just wanting him to see me seem better, but he was talking about the new book he's working on. Sorry, that came up earlier. Yeah. I forgot to mention it. It's going to be, I don't know the details, but it's going to be kind of like he did for Second World War. It's going to be the First World War, or however it's going to move forward. I don't know, but hopefully he did a good chunk of it. I know his work regimen. He would get up at like 5 every day. Wow. And write, and then go work at the War Museum, hang out with his family, which he mentioned to me multiple times, and then get back to work. I mean, his work ethic was amazing. I don't know how.
And do articles, and appear on podcasts, and do all the things he would do just as a popular historian.
Yeah. So his work ethic is always, I feel like I'm not working enough in comparison to what Tim was doing. But yeah, I think that's going to be part of his legacy continuing. It's still not even over, right? Because he's still got these books coming and all these articles and all the work that'll live through us. And then the last thing I'll say, and this might not be a big deal to everybody, but years ago there was at the same conference at Laurier, the big hitters were there. It was Jack Granatstein, Terry Kopp, and Roger Sardi. They were on stage, and Tim was the moderator. And he was somewhat sharing his stories, but like one of the things that came up was, the legacy of C.P. Stacey, who was the official historian of the Canadian Army, Second World War, for those who don't know. And he basically set the groundwork for what becomes Canadian military history. Without C.P. Stacey, we don't have any of us doing this today. I feel Tim is in that same level. He set the trend for what it's going to be. C.P. Stacey had his old ways. I'm sure lots of people agree with me, but without Tim, we don't have the trajectory we're on now. And like others have said, we have to keep this going. We have to keep doing what he was doing. And I'm sure he would agree with me on that, because he said this to me multiple times, just keep going. He knows it's tough. Yeah. And he said also too, insights. He said, writing is hard. I said to him, I'm like, you're a natural at this. He's like, no, I'm not. Which is,
wow.
That's so funny to me. And then he explained to me, he's like, yeah, it's hard. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And it's not, it didn't come natural. So that just made me feel so much better. I mean, every time I talked to Tim, I always felt better. So maybe that's the last thing I'll kind of say is he was such a great person. Yeah.
Well, stick around for a minute. I want to ask Ted, because Ted, I want to bring Ted in again, because I think something you said then, I'll ask Ted's opinion, is that I don't feel that any of Tim's books were like a kind of a mic drop. Here's the final word on this, walk out. Whereas some historians who are so confident of their knowledge base, maybe when they put out their book, it's like, this is it. That's it. This subject doesn't need any more. Yeah. I think Tim would be like, okay, that's what I think. Now, what do you think? I think there was always this offering of, I've said something, now you take it forward. And Ted, I want to bring you in on that, because, we're talking about accessibility. We're talking about hitting all different groups, and you've done a lot of that with your history. Tim reached everybody via museum, via lettering. So how important, Ted, was his ability just to be aspirational, but not also put people off that it's that you can't work at things.
Thanks for that, Woody. You know what? It's maybe the quintessential Canadian question, because Canadians are always listening. We are always listening to other perspectives, and they're often presented larger than life. And Tim, if you look at Tim's books, and what a canon of material. Yeah. When you look at the endings of each one, as you've suggested, he was always coming to a conclusion that was his research, that was his background, that was his experience, but left the door open for anybody else to chime in. And when you look at all of his books, those last pages, those last words often said, as you suggested, what do you think? And there's one other aspect to this end of his life that I found kind of extraordinary, and it reflects largely on my experience, not only with history, but with music. My father, Alex Barris, was a chronicler of Canadian musical and artistic presentation, dancers, comics, singers, musicians. And Dad used to tell me stories about Nat King Cole. And some of you may know this, but Nat King Cole knew before he should that his life was limited, that he could only last through what was an oncoming disease a certain length of time. And he produced some of his best music, his sharpest tones, his most deliberate and thoughtful and gorgeous melodies in the last years of his life, when he knew this was a statement of who he was, why he was there, why the material he could present was so important, and what it meant to him and his family and his fans. I sense that in spite of its tragic implications, I think Tim's understanding of his life and its limitations sharpened his wit, presented his material more effervescently, and yet still left the door open for all of us to offer response and to give another perspective. When he and I disagreed on stuff on Vimy, I simply said, here's the stuff, I'll send it to you that I found. And he returned my thoughts on Gregory Clark, who going up Vimy said, there were Canadians to the right of me, Canadians to the left of me. And when I got to the top of the ridge, it was my first full sense of nationhood. And Tim said, you're right. And when I talked about another Canadian who was part of that moment, Harold Innes, famous economic historian, he is one of the batteries, said we weren't fighting for king and country anymore. We were fighting for fellow Canadians. And Tim acknowledged that was different material. He was always open-minded. He was always engaging. And I think, as I say, I knew that he was battling the cancer as long as he was. And I really do think that in some ways it made him dig deeper, fight harder, present more to those of us who cared about Canadian history as much as he does.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Brad, will bring in your final words, and I'll speak to John again, and then go back to Ted. So Brad, yeah, Ted, as we expected, Ted summed it up beautifully there. And I think what David O'Keefe said an hour ago now, about passing it forward is key, is that he may be gone, but his methodology, his inspiration. So how will, terrible question, but how will you be trying to honor him as you move forward?
Yeah, that's no, it's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it, because to be honest, and I don't want to bring anybody down, but I've been struggling with that one. That's tough. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to, because no one will fill those shoes. That's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it won't be the same. It won't be the level that he was doing. I just don't know. Again, I don't know how he did it. I know how he did it, but I still don't know how he did it. Somebody else will come along eventually. That happens. Tim knew this. He told me this. He told audiences this, because I saw him speak all the time, at conferences and being in Ottawa, going to the talks and, giving talks before my talks and all that stuff. So I always heard that, and he had the same core messages. So I think that's kind of what we can do. The biggest one to me that I think keeps me going, and it keeps being brought up, but I do think it's important because it's tough, is as Canadians, or unofficial Canadians, or adapted or adopted Canadians like John now, and it's no one's going to do it, but I think it even runs deeper than that. It runs into what it can mean to be Canadian. I mean, I've struggled with that, what that means, but Tim has shown us ways of what we can do to honor those who came before us, but do it properly. Not necessarily, it's not propaganda, it's not just repeating the same old over and over again, because Tim never did that. So that's kind of what I take to heart, is we have to tell these stories, because if we don't, nobody will, or they won't tell them properly. And that's what I hope all of us could probably take from Tim's legacy. Is the one thing that always stuck to me about him, is he can do this proper academic stuff, but you can make it engaging. And some people say it's impossible, and I know it's not. That's not true. And that's a legacy I think Tim will leave behind, well, even after all of us are gone.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll ask John now, because I think my takeaway from Fight for History, that's my favorite of his works. I mean, I don't have the First World War stuff because it's not my backyard, but is that he doesn't provide all the answers in that book. He asks questions as well. He suggests things. He suggests, as you say there, Brad, what is Canada's identity? How were the war crimes treated? And although he's talking specifically about Canadians, he's generalizing about the veteran experience, the return from war, the what is it these men and women who fought wanted. You know, you're educating people now there, and I think that's an important thing of to not ever come across, because Tim didn't, as knowing everything. Listen to me, I know everything. He was a facilitator. He was, listen to me, but what do you think? Did you hear that in Tim's works and see that in Tim's writing, John?
Oh yeah, he was opening doors for all of us through his writing. Whether you were going to write something in response or build upon that, or whether you're going to have a conversation with someone at the dinner table or in a coffee shop. And I think that's the role of the historian, is to be not only accessible and to break down the gatekeepers that try to keep things inaccessible, but to also open the doors for those discussions.
Yeah.
And as you read through all of Tim's works, he's doing that. And you don't have to read between the lines. It's right there. And I love how he would end his books in the way, like you mentioned, Woody, where he and others who have been here earlier, and Ted has said it, and others, where he's inviting you to have that conversation with yourself. Even.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be with someone else. Have that conversation with yourself. Ask those really key questions concerning the past, concerning identity, concerning mythology, memory. And we had a discussion. I got to sit down and have coffee with him in June when I was visiting Ottawa, and I told him, I can't get over how much you've written. It just continues and it continues. And I said, I don't even know how to get started with writing, and you're just doing it. And he's like, well, you just have to ask yourself the right question and then go forward. And it gets down to the foundation of why it is what we do. We're just curious. And he wanted to promote that curiosity through his work, to pass on all that, because he was just full of curiosity and full of questions, almost to the point where he's pushing it upon us in a very positive way through his work and saying, come along for the ride. And that was something that not only was he the enabler I needed, but he was the person who's like, it's okay to ask questions. You should be asking questions. You should be formulating ideas around that.
I think that's a very good thing. Curiosity is a good word, a very good label for what he was doing and how he approached things. Is that I had this, there's a couple of younger tour guides in Normandy who I'm starting to mentor a bit now, because Colin was mentoring them, but Colin's not with us anymore. So I'm in fact, I'm seeing them tomorrow night. I'm having a Thanksgiving dinner in Normandy tomorrow. Is that trying to tell people that there's no collect. It's not like a baseball card. It's not like you can't get all the albums and know it all. You can't. There's no end game. There's no. I've completed the final level of World War II. There's no. I can sit back. It's always about however much you know. There's more to know. However much you think you know something, there's another way of looking at it. There's another point of view, as Ted was saying as well. There's different points about that. And I think that's. We started off talking about the fact he never lost his enthusiasm for it, and I think he never lost his curiosity as well. And Ted, I think you've got plenty of books behind you as well. You've got an incredible career behind you, but you would want to think that you're as curious about things in 20 years' time as you were 20 years ago, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's because of moments like this when we're sharing. Our praise for and our acknowledgement of a star. I mean, this man, as low key a presenter as he was just a rock star in this country.
Yeah.
But of the most genuine type. I think when I've seen my peers speak on television or hear them on radio or in podcasts, we all get really energized. We're a pretty excitable lot because we're always screaming in the wilderness saying, hey, don't forget us Canadians. Tim didn't have to do that. Tim didn't have to stand on a box and shout. He just, he had that wonderfully powerful position representing Canadian history in an iconic setting at the War Museum. But he also took that on the road with him. Whenever I bumped into him I was throwing my hands around and energized and jumping around in a room, and Tim was just low key, but just as powerful, if not more so. And it was, and one thought that has occurred to me as I've been listening to all of you talk, maybe more than anyone else, when I read Tim's words, I hear his voice. It's the same with my good friend David O'Keefe. When I read David's material, I hear David's voice, and that's a rare quality when you're delivering the printed word. Tim was masterful at that. Whether it was something that was instinctive and natural, or as Brad, you pointed out, his acknowledgement that writing is hard. And writing is really hard if you're being genuine, when you're not embellishing, you're not kind of looking to be flamboyant and to stand out, when you're simply trying to get a point across. He did it so subtly, so smoothly, so fairly, and so Cook-like.
Yeah. When you were saying that, I was thinking of it's an abstract, but you mentioned the music first, so it's your fault. I was thinking of Freddie Mercury with Queen at Live Aid, where some of the other bands have been jumping about, they're whirling guitars, and he just comes down and sits at the piano and starts. And I think that was Tim Cook. I mean, I only saw him speak once in San Diego, and it would be fair to say although he was moderating the panel, he was the big name in the room. The others were people more at the beginning of their careers, which is a testament again to the fact he was being part of that. But he knew he was sort of the biggest thing in the room, but he didn't act like he was the biggest thing in the room. There was a comment that came in earlier from Graham saying, main thing I always remember about Tim was how he always had time to talk to students. At conferences, everybody wanted a little piece of him, but he'd always find a few minutes for students. I think he was obviously being pulled left and right at this conference, and I did say to him, I will have a chat with you and a beer with you later on, and it just never happened because I expect he was having a chat and a beer with somebody else, and we couldn't all be at his table, so to speak. So yeah, I think that he had a quiet commanding presence about him, and when he spoke you listened, but at the same time he didn't prevent you from responding and engaging with him. I think that's it. So we'll do a little round of final words, and I'll do my solo bit, and I've got David Patterson's video to play. So Brad, final words. What one last thing?
Oh, that's tough. Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think just how we can keep going with what Tim stood for, I think is a good way to think of them. And it's like Mike said at the beginning, obviously it has, but it hasn't sunk in that he is gone. So I think that's how we can continue. What his legacy is continue on to do this. Yeah, Ted said it. Writing is hard. Doing this is hard. It's not easy. So it's a choice we make, all of us, to keep going. Yeah. And Tim will always be an inspiration to me.
Thank you. John, final words?
I told Tim one time, I said to him, I had a little too much coffee in me. And I said, Tim, just damn these gatekeepers. Let's just do this and have fun and let's get these students going. And he says, I've been talking about that for 25, 30 years and we're having a good time doing it. And we were just excited when we met in June to talk with one another finally for about 90 minutes. And I'm so glad that I had that 90 minutes of time because I didn't get to go to the October event that Brad was talking about earlier. And I could have used another, little push from him, because I was going into my comps. But I think all of us have to, we can never, be like him, in my opinion. There will never be another Tim Cook. But man, that's just that idea of being accessible and not complaining about things the way a lot of us do sometimes. Staying positive in our work and being open with students, with people who are in the chat, with everyone, because we don't want to be all academic. We want to be for the people. Tim Cook was for the people. And I think that's the way that we can stop the gatekeeping, stop the arrogance, and stop the negativity is to be, like, as Ted said, more Cook-like. And I'm going to use that term, Ted, in the future.
Sorry to
Still
speak
got
over you,
to
but I
your
think
part,
you're right there. It's we can't be him, but we can try and be like him in terms of how he treated people. We can't maybe have that little bit of stardust, that whatever it was that he had in terms of writing and speaking and things, but we can emulate his behavior towards other people. So final word to you, Ted, is as our senior historian in the room, still the last man standing, you've had similar awards in your career to Tim. So I'll leave the final word to you. What will you be taking forward?
I'll remember a night a couple of years ago when Tim and I were both speaking at the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto. And for some reason or other, they'd scheduled us both on the same night at the RCMI in Toronto. And I went down because my talk was starting a little later than his. I went down, and just as he was beginning, I poked my head in the room and waved at him and gave him a thumbs up. And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't stay. I got this gig up the hall." And so I went back up and started my presentation. And it wasn't too far into the talk. And I looked at the entrance in the back of the room, and there was a face just peeking around the corner. And it was Tim, and he gave me a thumbs up. And I thought,
nice.
How appropriate that we were both sharing the moment. And even though we were competing for an audience in the same building, we both had time for each other. And Tim never stopped doing that. A model of caring for what we all said and had to say, and where the place of Canadian military history is in our consciousness. He's there, and I'll repeat, I will hear his voice each time I pick up his books and read his words.
Well, thank you, Ted. Thank you, John. Thank you. I'll drop the three of you out now, and I've got David Patterson's video to play, which I nearly did because I was bringing it up. So thanks, Brad. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. It's been difficult for you all, I know. I'll speak to you again soon. And people have been asking about your channel. We'll get chatting about that at some point in the next few weeks or months, Brad. And John, you need to come on my channel. I've been on yours, but you should come on mine. Ted, let's do your Battle of Britain thing at some point, whatever you want to do. It'd be great talking to you three guys. And thank you everybody who was on earlier. So I'll kick you all out now and do my final sum up. So cheers, Brad. Cheers, John. And cheers, Ted. Right, so it's just me now, except I have the video to play from David Patterson, which I'll do that now. Obviously, David sent me this yesterday before he'd heard everybody else speak, so it will, to some extent, echo lots of other things I've said, but we will give the final words to David Patterson, and then I'll do my final thoughts. So I'll bring the video up now, and then we'll do that. So this is what David Patterson had to say about Tim Cook.
Good day, this is David Patterson, speaking to you from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and very honored to be part of this group paying tribute to Tim Cook, one of Canada's most prominent military historians. First off, I'd like to thank Woody for organizing this, for gathering those of us who wanted to pay tribute to Tim and give us an opportunity to say a few things about him to the World War II TV audience. I first met Tim at a conference run by the Laurier Center for Strategic Military and Disarmament Studies in Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. These conferences have been started by Terry Kopp and Roger Sardi, two giants of Canadian military history, with a view to encouraging young scholars, young students, and amateur historians to come and present their work to their peers, and to get feedback from professional military historians in an atmosphere of camaraderie and good humor. And these conferences still continue to this day in early May in Waterloo. So Tim was there as a young graduate student at the time, presenting his work on the First World War, I believe on the use of gas, which is I think his first book. Amazing scholar, amazing speaker, and a dynamic personality in front of a crowd. So we got to know him over the years of going to that conference in the early to mid 90s. And then the next time I ran into him or saw him was when he was heavily involved with the building of our National War Museum in Ottawa, which opened in 2005. Tim was in charge of the First World War Gallery and created what we see today. When you go through the War Museum, was much of it was to do to Tim's passion and effort. In particular, one story that he liked to tell was the Passchendaele Gallery, which is fairly bleak, as you might expect, with sort of fake mud and duck boards and shattered landscapes, including a corpse floating in a shell crater. The original plan had been for that corpse to be sort of half submerged in the shell crater, but the War Museum thought that the tender young students, elementary school students, would be a bit shocked to see a corpse lying on the floor there, so they submerged it a little bit more, so all you see is the back of the helmet and the back of his uniform. But what that meant was that there were bits of the mannequin that were left over. So Tim had a box in his office for many years of hands from these mannequins that he would take out and show you. His work, of course, with the War Museum was an amazing achievement, and of course his books. To my mind, his best and most important book is Vimy, his description of the battle, and also, more importantly, I think the cultural significance, or why Vimy became to be what it is in Canadian psyche and Canadian military history. I think that's a book that every Canadian should read. The last time I saw Tim was at the War Museum again in June, where we were helping to unveil a new exhibit there. And speaking about projects, future projects, to create lecture series for parliamentarians, sponsored by the commissionaires and the War Museum. So planning future projects and not giving an intimation that he was as ill as he was. And so it was a shock to us all when he passed. Although he had been, as many people know, been fighting cancer for a decade. So Tim will be greatly missed. His books, his many books, will live on and have become some of the standard interpretations, the standard volumes used to reference the First and the Second World War. His character study of Sam Hughes and Arthur Curry is another amazing volume. So his work will live on, his legacy will live on, and he will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved him. So thanks again, Woody, for this opportunity to pay tribute to Tim. We will remember him.
So that was the final words to the general there, and well, my final words. There's nothing I'm going to say now that hasn't been said by people who knew Tim better than I did. But I think it's if I will take one thing forward, it'll be that trying to pass it on, try to be nice to people, try to look at people at different rungs of the history ladder. As you know, I have guests who are venerable PhD holding teachers of history for 40, 50 years. I have other people who are brand new at it, who are and first rung of the ladder in terms of history, people who just run websites. The point is, I try and treat them all with the same respect. If they know their subject, they know their subject. And that's basically how I've been. And I think Tim is like that with me. When Tim, he's only been on World War II TV 3 times. The last time was talking about Kurt Meyer and the war crimes trials, and that was a month before he passed. And clearly his health was not the best at that point. We had a little discussion before going online, because he asked me about my year, and as you know, I've not had a fantastic year myself. My partner's had breast cancer, in remission now, thankfully. My mum passed away earlier in the year. My best friend Colin passed away 2 months ago now, and Tim Cook's passing was another blow to the belt. I didn't feel as personally affected because I didn't know him as well as some of the other people here, but I felt wounded that another good guy was down. And when he would engage with me on screen, you knew that he was listening to you. You knew that although he knew his subject, he was happy to hear my point of view. He was interested in what you guys thought in the sidebar. And I think that is my final comment really is that we could all learn a little bit from Tim Cook's way of being with people. As I've often said on this channel, don't be an arsehole. Just go through life being nice, being supportive, listening to people. And I think that's what Tim Cook would be. My personal favorite of his books is, and I'll hold up one more time, is The Fight for History. I think it's because it not just talks about history, it talks about why do we think this about history? What do we, what should we be thinking moving forward? He talks about historiography, he talks about the changing of attitudes, and I think that's why, well, all of his books are important. It's upsetting to know that when his next book comes out, I won't be able to engage with him about it, won't be able to talk with him about it. You won't be able to hear him talking about it. We will only have his words. But I say only have his words in the same sense that we only have the recordings of the Beatles. We only have B.B. King's great blues work. We only have, as Ted said, Nat King Cole's fantastic contribution to the world of music. So we only have Tim Cook's fantastic books and his legacy with the museum. It's a lot. His family, of course, have lost someone who is a very different center of their world than he has been the center of the history world. But there you are. I will end things up now. I've got a weekend off. Just to let you know what's coming up next week, we've got a fantastic show about football and World War II on Monday. We're looking at the role of entertainment within the British Army. We've got shows about the US 5th Air Force. We've got all sorts of things, whole series of Battle of the Bulge stuff coming up in December. As always, click like and subscribe. And if you are new to the channel or you are new to the works of Tim Cook, as we said earlier, go and read one of his books. If you don't find a hunger for learning more about the past from reading Tim Cook, then there's no hope for you, because he was someone who just made learning about World War II easy. He brought up complicated themes, but made it easy. So that's it. 2 hours, 10 minutes. There we are. And thanks. So I will see you all next time. This is Paul Woodadge, and thank you to all my guests, Mike and Carla and everybody else, and John and Brad and Alex and Emily and Ted and David. I think that's everybody. I will see you all after the weekend. Cheers, everybody.